July 1990. Dr. Roberto Vallejo stood in a makeshift operating room in a safe house on the outskirts of Medellin, staring at the man on the table. The man was bleeding out from 3 gunshot wounds, had maybe an hour to live without immediate surgery. And Dr. Vallejo, Pablo Escobar's personal physician for the past 4 years, was refusing to operate. Because the man on the table wasn't one of Pablo's sicarios, wasn't one of his bodyguards, wasn't anyone from the Medellin cartel at all. The man on the table was Carlos Anao, a lieutenant for the Cali cartel, Pablo's biggest rival, the enemy. And Dr. Vallejo had just told Pablo Escobar that he wouldn't save this man's life. What happened next would haunt Dr. Vallejo for the rest of his career and reveal something about Pablo Escobar that nobody expected. Dr. Roberto Vallejo was 43 years old in 1990, had graduated from the University of Antioquia Medical School with honors in 1975, finishing first in his class despite coming from a poor family in the comunas of Medellin. Had specialized in trauma surgery because that's where the jobs were, because Colombia needed surgeons who could patch up gunshot wounds and stab injuries. Had worked in Medellin's busiest hospitals for a decade, had seen more gunshot wounds and knife injuries than most surgeons see in a lifetime, sometimes performing 4 or 5 emergency surgeries in a single night shift. Colombia in the 1980s was a war zone, and Medellin was the center of that war. The drug cartels, the government, the guerrillas, the paramilitaries, everyone was killing everyone. And in the middle of all that violence, Dr. Vallejo had become one of the best trauma surgeons in the country simply because he had so much practice, because there were so many opportunities to perfect his craft on dying bodies. And that expertise, that reputation for being able to save men that other surgeons had given up on, had caught Pablo Escobar's attention. In 1986, Pablo's people approached Dr. Vallejo with an offer: become Pablo Escobar's personal physician. Be on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Treat Pablo himself, his wife Maria Victoria, his children Juan Pablo and Manuela, his sicarios, his bodyguards, anyone in the Medellin cartel organization who needed medical care. In exchange, Pablo would pay Dr. Vallejo more money than he could make in 20 years of the hospital, would protect his family from other cartels, from kidnappers, from anyone who might threaten them, would ensure he never had to worry about anything again. No more night shifts, no more fighting with hospital administrators, no more scrounging for equipment and supplies. Dr. Vallejo said yes, not because he wanted to work for a drug lord, but because saying no to Pablo Escobar wasn't really an option if you wanted to keep living in Medellin. When Pablo offered you a job, you took it, because the alternative was usually death. And the money was life-changing, more than Dr. Vallejo had made in the previous 5 years combined. And maybe Dr. Vallejo told himself he could do some good, could save lives that would otherwise be lost, could use his skills to help people, even if those people were criminals who would go on to hurt others. For 4 years, Dr. Vallejo did exactly that. Removed bullets from sicarios who'd been shot in firefights with police. Treated Pablo's children when they got fevers or infections that their famous father couldn't take them to a regular hospital. Performed surgery on bodyguards who'd been wounded in assassination attempts. Set broken bones. Stitched up knife wounds. Prescribed medications. Became Pablo Escobar's most trusted medical professional, the only doctor Pablo would let treat his family. And Pablo treated him well in return. Paid him generously, always in cash, always on time. Respected his expertise. Never questioned his medical decisions. Never tried to tell him how to do his job. Never asked him to do anything that violated his medical ethics. Until that night. Until July 1990. Until Carlos Anao. The night Carlos Anao was brought to the safe house, Dr. Vallejo had been woken at 3 a.m. by a phone call. Pablo's people said there was an emergency. A man with multiple gunshot wounds needed immediate surgery or he'd die. Dr. Vallejo drove to the safe house expecting to find another sicario, another bodyguard, another member of Pablo's organization. Instead, he found Pablo himself waiting in the doorway, and Pablo led him inside to where Carlos Anao lay bleeding on a table. Dr. Vallejo recognized Anao immediately. Everyone in Medellin knew who he was. Carlos Anao was one of the Cali cartel's top lieutenants, was responsible for operations in northern Valle del Cauca, was rumored to have ordered the deaths of dozens of Pablo's men, was, in every sense that mattered, Pablo's enemy. And now he was lying on a table in Pablo's safe house, bleeding out from gunshot wounds that Pablo's sicarios had obviously inflicted. Fix him, Pablo said. 2 words. Simple. Direct. Dr. Vallejo stared at Pablo, stared at Anao, stared back at Pablo. I don't understand. This man is your enemy. Your people shot him. Why do you want me to save him? Pablo's face revealed nothing. That's not your concern. Your concern is keeping him alive. So fix him. And that's when Dr. Vallejo made a decision that he would later describe as the bravest and stupidest thing he ever did. He refused. No, Dr. Vallejo said, I won't do it. The room went silent. Pablo's bodyguards tensed. Everyone was staring at the doctor who had just told Pablo Escobar no. Nobody said no to Pablo. Nobody refused Pablo's direct orders. And yet here was this doctor, this 43-year-old surgeon who'd spent 4 years working for the cartel, saying no. Pablo's expression didn't change. Explain. Dr. Vallejo took a deep breath. He knew he might be about to die, but he also knew he had to say this. I took an oath, the Hippocratic Oath. I swore to help the sick and injured, to do no harm. But this man is different. This man isn't sick or injured by accident. Your people shot him. You brought him here for a reason. If I save his life, you're going to use him. Torture him for information. Make him suffer before you kill him. I'd be saving his life so you can destroy it. That's not medicine. That's not healing. That's being complicit in torture. I won't do it. Pablo stared at him for a long moment. The silence stretched. Everyone in the room was waiting for Pablo to give the order, waiting for the bodyguards to kill the doctor who dared to refuse. But Pablo didn't give that order. Instead, he did something nobody expected. He laughed. Not a cruel laugh. Not a mocking laugh. A genuine, surprised laugh, like someone had told a joke he hadn't seen coming. You think I'm going to torture him? Pablo asked. Aren't you? He's Cali. He's your enemy. Why else would you want him alive? Pablo walked over to the table, where Inao lay unconscious, looked down at the man who'd ordered the deaths of his sicarios, who'd competed with him for territory, who represented everything Pablo was fighting against. And then Pablo said something that Dr. Vallejo would remember for the rest of his life. This man has a family, a wife, 3 children. The youngest is 5 years old. If he dies tonight, those children grow up without a father. They grow up hating me. They grow up wanting revenge. They become my enemies just like he was. But if he lives, if I let him live and send him home, he owes me a debt. His family owes me a debt. And debts can be collected. Dead men are useless. Living men who owe you their lives are worth more than gold. Dr. Vallejo didn't know what to say. This wasn't the Pablo Escobar he'd heard about. This wasn't a monster who bombed planes and killed hundreds. This was a businessman making a calculated decision. This was a strategist thinking 3 steps ahead. This was someone who understood that mercy could be more powerful than violence. You're going to let him go? Dr. Vallejo asked. If you save him, if you keep him alive long enough for me to have a conversation with him, then yes, I'll send him back to Cali. Let him tell the Rodriguez brothers that Pablo Escobar spared his life. Let them wonder why. Let them spend every day waiting for me to call on the dead. Dr. Vallejo looked at Inao again. The man was dying. His pulse was weakening. Without surgery in the next 30 minutes, he'd be dead. And if I still refuse? Dr. Vallejo asked. Pablo's expression changed then. The businessman disappeared. The strategist vanished. What remained was the man who'd killed thousands, who'd bombed buildings, who'd conducted a war against an entire government. And that man's voice was cold when he spoke. Then you'll watch me call your wife. You'll hear me tell her where to find your body. Then you'll watch me call your medical school, ask for the names of every professor who taught you. And one by one, doctor, they'll disappear. Not because they did anything wrong, but because you were stubborn. Because you forgot that you work for me. Because you confused having principles with having power. I am giving you a chance to save a man's life. To do exactly what you swore to do. And you're refusing because you don't like my reasons. That's not ethics. That's arrogance. Dr. Vallejo felt his hands shaking. He'd worked for Pablo for 4 years. Had heard the stories. Had known, intellectually, what Pablo was capable of. But he'd never seen it directed at him. Had never felt the weight of Pablo's violence focus on his own life, his own family, his own mentors. He had a choice. Refuse and die, along with his family and professors, or operate and save a life. When he put it that way, the choice was obvious. The result would be a living man instead of a dead one. Whatever Pablo's reasons, whatever Pablo planned to do afterward, Dr. Vallejo would be doing what he'd sworn to do, saving a life. I'll operate, he said quietly. Pablo nodded. Good. You have everything you need. Dr. Vallejo looked at the supplies his team had gathered. Surgical instruments, antibiotics, anesthesia, blood for transfusion. Yes, I have what I need. Then save him, doctor. And when you're done, we'll talk about what you said tonight. The surgery took 4 hours. Carlos Inao had 3 bullets in it. One in his shoulder that had shattered the bone and torn through muscle. One in his abdomen that had perforated his intestine in 2 places. And one that had grazed his liver and was causing internal bleeding that would have killed him within another hour if left untreated. Any one of them could have been fatal without treatment. All three together should have killed him. The fact that he was still alive when he reached Dr. Vallejo was itself a miracle, or perhaps just evidence that the sicarios who'd shot him had intentionally avoided hitting anything immediately fatal. Dr. Vallejo worked methodically, carefully, using every skill he developed over 15 years of trauma surgery. Repaired the intestinal perforations, stopped the hepatic bleeding, reconstructed what he could of the shoulder, gave blood transfusions to replace what he now had lost. And at the end of those 4 hours, as the sun was coming up over Medellin and the birds were starting to sing outside the safe house windows, Carlos Henao was stable, unconscious from anesthesia and blood loss, but stable. His vital signs were improving. His color was returning. He would live. When Dr. Vallejo emerged from the operating room, still wearing his blood-soaked surgical gown and gloves, Pablo was waiting. Had been waiting the entire 4 hours, sitting in a wooden chair in the hallway, reading a newspaper, drinking cup after cup of black coffee, like he was waiting for a friend at a sidewalk cafe, instead of waiting to see if his enemy would survive emergency surgery. His bodyguard stood silently along the walls, watching the doctor, watching their boss, watching for any sign of trouble. But Pablo himself seemed completely relaxed, completely calm, as if the outcome of the surgery was never in doubt. "He'll live," Dr. Vallejo said. Pablo set down his newspaper, looked at the doctor with something that might have been respect. "You know what you did tonight? I saved a man's life. You did more than that. You told me no, in front of my men. You stood there and refused a direct order. Do you know how many people have done that and survived?" Dr. Vallejo didn't answer. He suspected the number was very small. "Almost none," Pablo continued. "Almost everyone who tells me no ends up dead. But you, doctor, you're different. You didn't refuse because you were scared. You didn't refuse because you were being disloyal. You refused because of your principle, because of your oath, because you believed you were doing the right thing." Pablo stood up, walked over to Dr. Vallejo, looked him in the eye from inches away. "I respect that. I don't agree with it. I think you were wrong. But I respect a man who has principles and stands by them, even when it might get him killed." Pablo reached into his pocket, pulled out an envelope, handed it to Dr. Vallejo. "What's this?" the doctor asked. "Double your usual payment. For tonight. And for your courage." Pablo paused. "But doctor, don't ever tell me no again. Tonight I was impressed. Next time I might not be." Dr. Vallejo took the envelope, nodded, didn't say anything. What was there to say? Carlos Henao woke up 3 days later, was kept at the safe house for a week while he recovered, and then, exactly as Pablo had promised, he was sent home, driven to the edge of Cali territory, released with a message for the Rodriguez brothers. "Pablo Escobar says you owe him a life." The Cali cartel never responded to the message, never acknowledged what had happened. But according to later reports, according to people who were inside the Cali organization at the time, the Rodriguez brothers were shaken by what Pablo had done, had expected Pablo to torture Henao for information, had expected to receive his body in pieces as a message. Instead, they got him back alive, healthy, with a debt hanging over him that they didn't know how to repay. It was psychological warfare of the highest order. Pablo had demonstrated that he could kill their people whenever he wanted, but he'd also demonstrated that he could spare them. And that unpredictability, that willingness to show mercy when violence was expected, was more terrifying than any bombing could have been. Dr. Vallejo continued working for Pablo until 1993, when Pablo was killed. After that, he returned to legitimate medicine, worked at hospitals, taught at medical schools, never spoke publicly about his years with the cartel, until 2018, when he gave an interview to a Colombian journalist for a documentary about Pablo Escobar. And in that interview, he told the story of the night he refused Pablo's order, told the story of Carlos Henao, told the story of the choice he made and the lesson he learned. "People ask me if Pablo Escobar was a monster," Dr. Vallejo said in the interview. "And I tell them the truth. He was. He killed thousands of people. He destroyed families. He corrupted Colombia. But he was also capable of mercy, of calculation, of respecting someone who stood up to him. That night, when I refused to operate, I was certain I was going to die. I had made peace with it. And then Pablo surprised me. He didn't kill me for my defiance. He rewarded me for my courage. He showed me that he wasn't just a killer. He was a man who understood that fear and respect are different things. Fear fades. Respect remains. And by sparing Carlos Henao, by sparing me, Pablo created respect where there had only been fear. It was brilliant. It was terrifying. And it taught me that the line between monster and man is thinner than any of us want to believe." When asked what happened to Carlos Henao, Dr. Vallejo smiled sadly. "He survived the surgery. He went home to his family. He lived another 8 years. Died of cancer in 1998. Natural causes. Which means, in the end, I succeeded. I saved his life. Not for Pablo's reasons. Not because of Pablo's threats. But because that's what doctors do. We save lives. Even when the world around us is doing everything it can to end them. The interviewer asked one final question. If you could go back to that night, knowing everything you know now, would you make the same choice? Would you refuse Pablo's order again? Dr. Vallejo was quiet for a long moment. I don't know. I like to think I would. I like to think I still have that courage. But I'm older now. I've seen more. I understand better how fragile life is, how easily it can be taken. Maybe I'd just operate and not ask questions. Maybe I'd choose survival over principles. But I hope not. I hope that somewhere inside me, there's still the doctor who told Pablo Escobar no. Because that's the version of myself I want to be. That's the version that makes me proud. The documentary aired in 2019. Dr. Vallejo died 6 months later, at the age of 72. His obituary mentioned his years at the University of Antioquia, his work in trauma surgery, his contributions to medical education. It didn't mention Pablo Escobar. It didn't mention the night he refused a direct order from the most dangerous man in Colombia. But the people who knew, the people who'd seen the document, they remembered. And they told the story of the doctor who said no to Pablo Escobar and lived to tell about it.